Hi, this is Janet Fitch, and it is noon on Wednesday, and so it is Writing Wednesday when I answer your writing questions. And so if you have questions, I have a question that's been sent to me that was a very good one, but if you have questions, I'm happy to answer your questions. And I do this every Wednesday at noon. If you have a question that you would like me to address in a Writing Wednesday, I would be happy to design a whole Writing Wednesday around your questions. So you can always send me a question through my website, janetfitchwrites.com. And right now I am coming to you from the Tahoe area, where I am teaching at the Community of Writers. You know, many of you have taken classes, virtual classes, from me through the Community of Writers. I have come up here every other summer, except for the pandemic, since 2001. I was a participant here in 1995. I met my editor here. It's a place where all kinds of literary magic happens, and it's obviously going on now. But if you ever think you might want to come to the Community of Writers, go online, take a look at what what the offerings are, what it looks like. And then maybe next year you'll give that a try. So I'm going to show you out the window just how beautiful it is up here. It's like being at camp. So here we are in the Sierras. I just gave a craft talk yesterday on writing from the senses. So it's a terrific place to talk about the senses and do sense work and trying to get people, as you know, out from their screens, out into real reality and handling objects and, smelling the air and, interacting with physical reality, because we always forget to do that. We are thinking about the drama, we're thinking about the interaction between characters, what's going to happen next, all that kind of stuff, and we forget to write about the senses. So I think, doing sense work is it's very helpful for the writer. It's the reader. It puts the reader into the story, so they feel it, they smell it, they touch it. It's not just something somebody's telling you. It's the world complete, the complete world. I am going to get another couple of books to prop up my virtual studio stage here. We're all directors these days, directing our own videos. Anyway, so today's topic, I got a really interesting letter. So if you want me to design one of these around your question, just go ahead and send it to me through my website. So today's question was from Meredith. And Meredith writes, hi Janet, Meredith here from the Point of View workshop. So I taught a Point of View workshop through the Community of Writers, an online weekend intensive. And I'm actually going to be doing a roundtable up here on Point of View. So we have senses and point of view and, things that you're familiar with now that you've been watching my appeal for my thoughts for a while. So here's Meredith's question. Hi Janet, Meredith here from the Point of View workshop. I just posted this on the July 6th Writing Wednesday comments about the novel. Realized I could just send it to you directly and answer however you like. My question was related to chapters and the episodic method of writing. Sometimes I feel pressure to make every chapter a cliffhanger. maybe because of the current popular suspense novels, but I feel it can be too divisive and distracting. Hi, Meredith, we're doing your question. Too divisive and distracting if every chapter ends that way. Do you have any thoughts on effectively ending connecting chapters or other ways to have interesting transitions? If one uses the scenic episodic approach, are there other ways to close the scene where the reader wants to keep reading without doing the cliffhanger approach every time? Thank you and hope you're doing well, Meredith. The cliffhanger was developed largely in the time of Dickens, where novels were serialized. So they were serialized in journals that would come over, like people would wait on the docks for Dickens's, the next installment of the latest Dickens novel. And the cliffhanger was, oh my God, what's going to happen? You can break a scene in the middle. If you have a long chapter, you can break a scene in the middle, and then ending in mid-scene is a cliffhanger, and then you go finish the scene in the next chapter. You don't want to do it a lot. It's like any other attention-getting device. If anything is too flashy, people are going to remember it, and you can't use it too much. So I'd say in every novel, maybe a small handful, 5 cliffhangers. You have to trust that there is a forward movement of your novel, that you write a scene or chapter. Sometimes a chapter will have more than one scene. A chapter could have 3 scenes. Some people have long chapters. Sometimes a novel will have, will only have, say, 20 chapters, and each chapter will have several scenes. So a scene is one place, one time. Something happens where you can't go back to the way it was before. Usually scenes within a chapter are related in some way, so they're actually a sequence. They're, there'll be, say it's a roundup, in branding, and 3 different things happen in that branding sequence, the roundup and the branding. Say there's rounding up the cattle, and something happens in the saddle, as you're rounding up the steers. Then there might be the actual branding scene, and maybe the first time somebody sees that, and it's quite vivid. If you've never seen a branding, it's like, yeah, that's pretty real. And then maybe one more scene of something that happens after the branding. So the 3 scenes together would be called a sequence, and maybe that whole branding sequence would be in one chapter. So that's why would you have a cliffhanger coming off of stopping in the middle of a branding scene and then going into the next one? It's not necessary. It's odd and awkward. But every once in a while you might have a really long scene, and you want to break the scene in half. So that's where your cliffhanger would be. When you're worried about the profluence, which is the thing that makes the reader want to move forward, the thing that's pulling them, if there isn't enough, if there isn't a question that hangs the reader, that hooks the reader on, that they want to see what happens, then you have to have something happens in that chapter that propels the character and thus the reader into the next chapter. So if you've just ended your chapter with your character being thrown out of the house, you know, the wife has discovered the infidelity and throws the husband out. Your next chapter, people will turn that page because they want to know what happens, you know, and maybe the next chapter will be the wife's point of view, or the husband's point of view. Doesn't matter. It's that the reader wants to know what happens next. So leaning too heavily on the cliffhanger is almost an admission that nothing is happening, and you're afraid you're going to lose the reader. That it's like when you're fishing and you hook the fish, that's the reader, and you're playing the fish, you pull them in, you let them run, you pull them in, but sometimes the line will go dead and you feel like you've lost the reader. So rather than reach for a device to keep the reader on the hook, like breaking a chapter in the middle, the cliffhanger, you go back and think about what can happen in the chapter or that will sink that hook a little deeper. Like what will involve the reader more so that when that chapter is over, they are eager to move on to the next chapter. They always say Dostoevsky tied a girl to the tracks in the middle, in the first 50 pages of every novel he wrote. Like which of the three brothers, we don't know that there's a fourth at first, which of the three brothers killed the father in the Brothers Karamazov? Once we want to know which of the brothers killed the father, then we are happy to go explore this brother's life, this brother's life, this brother's life, and get to know each of them better, because that essential question that set the hook, who killed the father, will keep us turning the pages. There's a big question that we always want to know. Sometimes the question is just, how is your character going to survive this? You know, so you have them going through tough things in the book, and having something change within the character by the end of the chapter will propel the reader to see now what happens to that kind of changed person who's just been through that scene. In a braided novel, you'll switch to another character. When you have like 3 point of view characters, and handing the point of view back and forth. So a cliffhanger sometimes will leap through 2 more chapters before you resume. So, you know, there's a big auto accident, and we don't know whether character A survived it. And they turn the page, and it's character B's story for a while. And then we finish that, and then we're in character C's story for a while. And then we go, God, are we ever going to find out whether that guy survived that, you know, that car accident? And then we turn the page and we're back to A, and then we find out what happened. That's a good use of a cliffhanger. Just not too many of them. People get tired of it. It becomes a shtick instead of an interesting moment. You know, here we are again, another cliffhanger. I don't like, there's an author I know who does a lot of cliffhangers, and, you know, he'll do things like, you know, what she didn't know, you know, upcoming, you know, is that she wouldn't want to know, you know, what happened there, you know, so she'd wish, and that it tires you. The cliffhanger tires the reader after a while. You know, use sparingly. You know, it's like a flavor that is interesting in of itself, but you don't want to keep coming at, you know, every dish has that flavor. The reader gets sick of it and gets sick with being toyed with. I know I do. So The sparingly, it depends on how many chapters and what kind of a book it is, but I'd say in a whole novel, maybe 4 cliffhangers is enough. If you like cliffhangers, that would be enough. And so your feeling about cliffhanger is correct. In episodic writing, what does that mean? So episodic writing is where a character's world, the book isn't set in one world. That's a stable world, and we go into the world, and it opens little doors inside the story. I'll use my own work as an exemplar, just because I know it well. The White Oleander was an episodic novel. It starts with the mother in Hollywood. Astrid is living with her mother in Hollywood, and then it goes foster care, first home, second home, third home, and each of those homes is like a little story within the larger story of Astrid's coming of age and her dealing with her main problem, which is her mother. So that's an overarching problem, but there are different worlds, and so the episode is the first home, the second home, the third home. So the question about episodic structure, it's not necessarily a cliffhanger, but usually these homes, these episodes will end in some dramatic fashion and eject the character into a new situation. So what you need is not only that episode, but there is an overarching problem that will no matter what your individual episodes are, there will be some central question that will move with the character from episode to episode. So that's the difference between that, or you have something like Painted Black, which is my second novel, which is about a small group of people and one place, one time, those people and their interactions and what happens within that one world. So it's a more unified situation. So think of it as, I think of it spatially just because that's the way I think. So episodic structure seems like horizontal. It moves from one location to another, to another, to another. Whereas the unified novel, like Light Painted Black, you go down into it and dealing with the same group of people and going down into relationships. So each episode in an episodic book will be a mini version of that, but there's a horizontal movement where you don't get that so much in a centralized story. I think that there is some episodic quality to every novel, but it's like when you're dealing with a core group of characters who do not change, the composition doesn't change much of the people, then you're having more of a central thing. A lot of a journey is more episodic. The hero's journey is certainly episodic. So that's one aspect of the question. And feel free to ask me anything. I'm free today, and I have time to answer your questions. Meredith's question was the only one I got through this week. So she asks, what are other ways to have interesting transitions? If one uses the scenic episodic approach, what other ways can you close the scene? A scene is I've taught scene and story, and the scene is the building block of all fiction. So scene is real-time situation where a character comes in with one idea, one thing they want, something that they're doing in there, a mood that they come in with. And one time, one place, something happens in that place at that time that changes the mood of that character. You have a scene because something has changed, something has happened where the character can't go back to the way it was before. So a scene is like those little teeth on the parking lot where do not back up, will tear your tires out. Think of a scene like that. You can't go back to the way it was before. You can only go forward. That propels the reader as well as the character into the next chapter. What do they do with what had just happened? So other ways of keeping, you can move ahead. The great use of a chapter break is that you can move ahead in time. You've gone through the rodeo. Let's do the roundup idea. You've had the roundup. You've been in the saddle. You've been in the high country. You've been bringing the cattle down on the road, and something happens on the road that changes the mood of the character. And then you'll have it in a sequence of 3 scenes. Then the next one, you'll go into that scene with the mood, say you did something wrong and somebody yelled at you or something. And so you go into the next scene feeling like you've already screwed up and you're just trying to stay out of the way and not draw attention to yourself. And then something else happens in that next second scene that changes your mood entirely. And then afterwards, everybody's, sitting around passing the bottle or having some ribs or whatever a third scene would be after the roundup. And something really significant happens in that one because that's your chapter closer. And you can go from the end of that chapter like something really significant has happened to your character by the end of that third scene. You can come back in the next chapter, you can come in a month later. So you can take a big chunk of time and move ahead between chapters. That's a very good use of chaptering. Ways of closing the scene. And when something has happened that has changed life for your character as you end the chapter, the reader will naturally expect that the next chapter will be new, something brand new will be happening, because otherwise your tires will have been torn out of your car. You can't go back, so you can only go forward. And where will the character go? Is always the question at the end of a chapter. Always stop your scene once the change has happened. There are some people who, have you ever noticed somebody who makes a really good point, in a conference, in a meeting or something. They make or dinner even. They make a really good point, but then they keep talking and they kind of erode the impact of what they've just done. Once you've finished the scene, the emotional movement of the scene, something has happened, stop there. Don't go in and wash the dishes and talk about nothing. allow the impact to resonate like a big bell. Boom, something has happened. And then that stays with the reader, and then they want to go to the next and see what you've got in store for them next. So Malika asks, what is your take on metaphor and simile? Well, everybody knows that I love a good metaphor. For me, a good metaphor is a way, because metaphors is a comparison of one thing to another thing, right? Something is like something. So it's a further way of description. You can describe stuff literally, you can describe stuff in the psychological. Once you get into simile and metaphor, you are telling us as much about the character as you're telling us about what they're describing. Because the kind of metaphor, the kind of language they choose is a reflection of the way they think. So, for instance, and this is, obviously simplistic, but a plumber's metaphor will be about plumbing. So if a plumber gets in a tough situation at a party or something, he would think about like a clogged drain, my conversation swirled dirty at the bottom of the shower, the metaphors will conform to the character. A character who has read too many romance novels will have a certain kind of metaphor as a way of describing anything, though they will pick from their own vocabulary. Somebody as a cook will use a cooking metaphor. Somebody who is not exclusively, but people speak characteristically, and so if you have a character who has a strong background in something, they will go into that language for a metaphor to describe something that might be interpersonal, it might be, just seeing some phenomena. They'll reach for the language that they're familiar with handling. I love metaphor and simile because for me, a metaphor, it's like a three-way mirror. You get at a description. You get a description from the side. You get another look at it from a different angle. And I think some people dismiss metaphor, that kind of language. They think it's flowery, they think it's poetic. But in fact, if you read the hard-boiled crime writers, they're great at metaphor. They're fabulous and sometimes very funny, the way they describe stuff. You can use irony, you can use understatement. If you read Chandler, he's like a master. Todd Goldberg is a crime writer, contemporary, and he has wonderful metaphors. It expands it expands the reader's understanding of what is being described. It's rich. It's like when a singer doubles their voice, in the recording studio. It's the same voice, but it's slight. It gives a slight dimensionality to the voice, and so I say only one per sentence. Don't pile it on. But a good metaphor, an apt metaphor, makes the whole thing brighter. It sings. It's what people remember. It's what people notice as they're reading and they get an apt metaphor, and they'll laugh just because it's so right. So I'm very fond of it. What else can what else can we talk about? I'm completely open to suggestions today. I just was using Meredith's question about cliffhangers, and how to connect and transition between chapters. So I'm doing a lot of sense work up here at the community of writers up here at Tahoe, in California's Sierra Nevada. I love mountains. Some people are beach people, some people are mountain people, and I'm a mountain person for sure. So I'm getting a big charge out of being up here. And then there's 150, 160 writers, and I don't know how many teachers, wonderful writers, editors, agents. So I'm in a house with other people, and we're being very COVID careful, mostly outside. But it's been, so it was just been talking a lot about all aspects of writing. So I have 6 manuscripts that I'm going to do one-on-ones with, and one of them has backstory, has a lot of backstory to deliver. It's historical, a lot of backstory to deliver. And the backstory has kind of overtaken the front story. Like there's, and the difficulty with historical, especially an intricate family story where the relationships between people are very important, it's always, the front story is the story. What is actually the actual live scene that is happening is the story. And the backstory has to be worked in, usually on a need-to-know basis. So don't, try not to burden your reader with too much backstory for them to absorb. Make sure the connection with the front story is made clear. I know it's like anybody telling you a story, and they have to go back and they say, well, my Uncle Jimmy, he married my mother's second cousin, Margie, and boy, was she an amazing woman, and she was like this, and Jimmy was like that. They have to go back like 3 generations. For people not in the family, that is really a long way around the mountain. What you want to know is why cousin Jimmy, put his fist through the wall at Thanksgiving. You have to start with the present scene and then find a way to work in just what you need to know to understand why he did it. And if you don't, and if you have to put in a family tree on page 8, that's like really problematic. So always think what's going to keep the reader on the hook, rather than the writer's need to try to tell everything that they think you need to know. If you're moving away from the real-time scene, you're going to start having problems with the reader. You're going to start losing the reader off the hook. So there's something that's been coming up. What else has been coming up in the manuscripts? So I have 2 workshops and 6 one-on-ones. Yesterday, one of the difficulties of, not difficulty, one of the things we discussed was scene, just making sure that all people have movement, they have movement, the character moves from place to place and has a job to do at each place, but always straining that through the sensibility of the character, that there's nothing neutral in a book. Everything has a psychological spin to it. The character has a feeling about it, You change a tire, your tire blows out and you're on the highway changing the tire. That's not neutral. The character who is changing the tire has an opinion about having to change the tire while they do it. Do they feel competent? Does it make them feel competent and like on top of the situation? Or does it make them feel like unprepared. Oh, why didn't I check this? I'm such a loser, Does it make them feel helpless? I don't even know how to do this, but I'm a guy and I'm supposed to be able to change a tire, but I don't remember. My dad, told me once, but my dad and I had problems, and, you strain it through their point of view. So Malika asks, how does scene connect with story? Well, the scene is the building block of story. So story is an overall question. I do story from character-driven story. That's my favorite. That's what I write. So character-driven story is about it's about the whole piece, and I always think of it as XYZ. Some of you have heard me say this, where character X, meaning not their name but who they are, egotistic, stubborn, smart, and surprisingly empathetic character, Debbie, finds themselves in situation Y. So X is the character and their traits. Y is the situation that the author puts them in. And it's situation Y is particularly geared to exactly the traits that character has. So if I have an arrogant character, I probably would put them in a situation that puts pressure on that trait. So an arrogant person needs to be in a situation that shows them up, that makes them, that humiliates them, or they're struggling to maintain their arrogance in the face of obvious evidence that they have nothing to be arrogant about, and they fight for it. People fight to maintain their traits, but the situation puts pressure on them to change. So if somebody is a complex character, they'll have traits that don't change, and they'll have traits that under pressure have to shift. So situation Y is how you're going to put pressure. Like if you have somebody who's afraid of snakes, you put them in a room full of snakes. If you have a character who is a brat, put them in a situation where there's another character who's a brat. Or you put them in a situation where they start to realize that their brattiness isn't helping them. So X, Y, and then Z is what happens, what the character learns, how the character changes. Characters who don't change are called antagonists. Antagonists don't change. They have their fixed set of characteristics, and they're confident in them, and they keep going. Your protagonist is capable of change. That's why we follow them, why we're interested in them. So that's a story, is X, Y, and Z. Scenes are how you get there. They're the increments, so this scene, how am I putting pressure on my brat in this scene? The thing about scenes is people can't go back to the way they were. So if somebody is a brat and they have a realization that wait a second, this isn't working, people are leaving the room, maybe the end of that is not that maybe I shouldn't be such a brat. The ending of that might be people are assholes. Wrong conclusion, but it's put pressure on them, and the next time maybe they're a little bit less sure of themselves, or a little more aggressive, trying to deal with the feelings that they've been left with. So each scene is an increment in the larger picture. So that's kind of how scene connects with story. What else can I tell you about today? Let's see, there's been a lot of talking about working backstory in, not dumping it on the reader, because the reader just goes cross-eyed. They can't take in too much. Oh, Steve. Hi, Steve. He says, it's a delicate balance providing information to the reader that it's relevant, trying to weave it into the dialogue without burdening. I'm improving at this. And remember that dialogue is not just what people say, that what people think in a scene is also dialogue. What they see, that sometimes that sometimes comments on what they're thinking or what's going on. Like, mom is scolding Johnny, and Johnny looks out the window and sees the neighbor kid on a bike doing wheelies. It comments on the action, it comments on the dialogue and the dialogue scene with what the character sees. Or, a character is trying to make the best of their life with new husband or whatever, and looks up and there's the big water stain that's getting bigger, in their crappy apartment. So she's trying to think of the best, and then there's that evidence that they're very much struggling. You don't have to say we're struggling, you can see it. And all of that is dialogue. So, but definitely providing information to the reader. If you use the narrative portion of a chapter, when you start the chapter, you can kind of use a bit of authorial voice to say, the winter of 1917 was a one for the books, it was this, it was that, Sherman just took Atlanta, and you catch people up, and then you go into the live scene. So you don't have to do all that crap in the middle of a scene. You just catch us up, and then away you go. What's bad is breaking the scene or thinking that a bunch of narrative like that, it gets to the point where you're losing the fish. So you can only give as much information as the reader will hang in with you to find out who killed the father. The more absorbed they are by what is happening in the present scene, then you can slip in that information that they need to know to understand the scene that they're in. Try not to back up too much and talk about irrelevant things. It's like if I have a scene where it's winter 1919, Civil War Russia, I can talk about where the lines are, what has just happened, maybe a paragraph, and then the reader's going to want a real-time scene. Sometimes I remember, I just saw this morning because I'm going to do a reading of Chimes of Lost Cathedral this afternoon, that I want to talk about the battles. I want to talk about the Civil War and how it's going, Russian Civil War after the Revolution. And so I have my character in bed with the one-armed man who she's kind of using in a way. But she likes him because he works for the railroad and he has a map and he has the telegraph and he actually knows what's going on. So they sit in bed. The one-armed man is smoking a cigarette with his one arm and holding the map and showing her where the troops are and what's going on as he's dropping ash onto her belly. She's pregnant. So it's a sensual scene that I'm using to convey information, but in a way that would be natural in the situation. And part of the real-time scene. So that's, it's always how to bring it in without, without collapsing the souffle. That's Steve. I know he's working on a historical novel, and historical novel, when you do it, people really learn a lot without feeling like they're in high school. They're getting the information without thinking, oh, are we going to be tested on this? It's got to be interesting. What else is there anything else I can tell you about? It is Wednesday, isn't it? Yeah, it's fun being on the road and, being loosened up from daily life. Yes, it is Wednesday. That's good. I haven't completely lost track of my life. What else has come up for people? For me, often it's writers forget to tell us about the physical world, that we're very much involved in what happens in the room, but we forget to say that there is a room and there's light coming and somebody's talking and where is the light falling on their face, and it's pooling on on her round nose and the uneven bumps of her forehead. I mean, I'm sorry to describe myself, but here we are. That it's make the room alive. Put a scent, give something a smell. Give something a sound. There's sound outside. I can hear the fan. I can hear a couple of footsteps down the living room in the house that I'm staying at. One of the exercises I have the students up here doing is the 10-minute sit, where you sit outside for 10 minutes in an interesting orally interesting environment, and write down everything that you hear in 10 minutes and try for a verb. So not just, wind. It's, what is the sound? What's the verb? The wind, shredding the aspens or whatever. Start moving towards the verbs, not just naming the source of the sound, but trying to use a verb to characterize the sound is a real muscle builder for writers. So the 10-minute sit. What do different people's footwear sound like as they're walking? It's when you sit there with your eyes closed and you hear people walking, you really hear a difference between the footsteps, what their footwear is, the people in flip-flops, the people in sneakers, the people in a hard-soled shoe, somebody in heels. They all sound different, and reaching for the language to describe that is really good. It's like going to the gym for writers to accumulate that information. Well, if there are no more questions, I guess I will wrap up and wish you a good Wednesday. Write well, and we will see you next week for Writing Wednesday. Feel free to send me your questions in the meantime, and I'll answer them as well as I can. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Okay, bye.